I was a virgin and had to marry a ruthless millionaire, but he fell to his knees after our first night. Hey, beautiful souls, welcome back to the channel. I'm so incredibly happy and grateful that you're here with me today. I hope you're doing well, and if you're not, I'm sending you so much love and warmth right now. May your heart be filled with peace, may your mind be calm, and may all your hidden prayers be answered in the most beautiful and unexpected ways. I pray that you find strength in your challenges, joy in your quiet moments, and love in the places you least expect it. You are not alone. You are deeply loved and valued, and I'm so thankful that you're sharing this moment with me today. I need you to stay with me for this one because today's story is really special. I spent 12 hours crafting it, pouring my heart and soul into every word, just for you. It's not just a story. It's an emotional journey that I truly believe will touch your heart and soul in a way that stays with you long after it's over. So please sit back, relax, and give this story the attention it deserves. I promise it's worth it. But before we dive in, I want to feel connected with you. Please take a second to drop a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from because it means the world to me to know where this story is reaching. And please don't forget to comment present so I know you're really here with me, heart to heart. Now, take a deep breath. Let the world fade away for a little while and let's dive into this beautiful story together. And hey, if this touches you even half as much as it touched me while creating it, please don't forget to subscribe and join this growing family. All right, let's begin. Albert Carrington was the definition of power and coldness, a man who had conquered the business world with an iron grip, his name synonymous with wealth and dominance. He had built an empire from the ground up, his ruthless strategies and sharp business acumen making him feared and admired in equal measure. Competitors trembled at the mention of his name, and women threw themselves at his feet, desperate for a piece of his fortune. But Albert never cared for any of it. His heart was a fortress of ice, untouched by emotion, shielded from love. Despite his immense success, he lived in a lonely glass mansion overlooking the city, his life devoid of warmth and human connection. He had everything money could buy, private jets, luxury cars, a sprawling estate. But there was one thing that lingered in his mind like an unquenchable thirst. He wanted a virgin bride. His reasons were buried deep within the shadows of his past, hidden behind a wall of pain and mistrust. He had seen the ugliness of betrayal and the greed of those who sought to entangle him in emotional chains, and because of that, his heart had turned to stone. But for reasons even he couldn't explain, the idea of claiming an untouched woman, pure, innocent, untainted by the world, became an obsession that grew sharper with every passing day. His search was relentless. His agents scoured elite social circles, high-profile gatherings, and even private events. But none of the women they brought before him stirred anything inside him. Until the night of the charity gala. Albert arrived at the gala with his usual detached expression, dressed in a tailored black suit that accentuated his broad shoulders and lean frame. His jet black hair was perfectly styled, his beard trimmed to perfection, and his piercing dark eyes scanned the room with cold calculation. He was only there because his business partner had insisted on making a donation, and Albert never refused a strategic advantage. But then he saw her. Across the room, standing near a marble column adorned with cascading white roses, was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Hyra Stewart. She was breathtaking. Her smooth brown skin glowed under the soft lighting, her wide almond-shaped eyes framed by dark lashes that curled delicately toward her high cheekbones. Her braided hair, styled intricately, rested over one shoulder, the dark strands gleaming under the chandeliers. Her full lips, painted a soft pink, curved into a hesitant smile as she glanced nervously around the room. She wore a sleek emerald green dress that hugged her curves modestly, but even the modesty of the dress couldn't hide the perfection of her body. Albert's gaze sharpened, his chest tightening in a way that unsettled him. He had never reacted to a woman like this before. His cold, calculating mind faltered as he watched her laugh softly at something a nearby guest said, her wide eyes sparkling with a sweetness and vulnerability that made his throat dry. His feet moved toward her before he could stop himself. Hira noticed him too late. When she turned, she found herself looking up at the tallest man in the room, his dark gaze pinning her in place. Hira Stewart. His voice was low, authoritative, and smooth like silk. She swallowed hard, her heart hammering in her chest. Yes, she stammered. Albert extended his hand. Albert Carrington, he said, his lips curling into a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. Hira hesitated before placing her soft hand in his. His skin was warm, his grip firm yet gentle. The moment their hands touched, a strange heat shot through Albert's veins. He didn't release her hand immediately. Instead, his thumb brushed against her knuckles, sending a shiver through her body. "Walk with me," he said. It wasn't a request. Hira followed him through the crowd, her heart pounding as he led her to a private balcony overlooking the city. "You're beautiful," Albert said bluntly, his eyes raking over her face with such intensity that Hira's breath hitched. "Thank you," she whispered. He studied her closely, his gaze sharp and assessing. "You're a virgin, aren't you?" Hira's eyes widened in shock, her cheeks flushing with color. What?" Albert's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, his hand brushing over her shoulder, and she felt his warmth through the thin fabric of her dress. "Answer me," he murmured. Hira's lips parted, but no sound came out. Finally, she nodded. Albert's chest tightened. "Perfect," he breathed. That night, Albert sent his team to investigate everything about Hira Stewart. He learned about her family's financial struggles, her mother's medical bills, her father's failed business ventures. Hira had been carrying the weight of her family's burdens since she was a teenager, working 2 jobs to keep her younger brother in school. Albert's dark gaze sharpened as he processed the information. He knew exactly what needed to be done. The next evening, Albert showed up at Hira's small apartment. Hira opened the door to find him standing there, a single red rose in his hand. "Come with me," he said. "Where?" she asked warily. "To meet your future," he replied. Confused and wary, Hira followed him to a private jet. He took her to a luxurious penthouse overlooking the city, sat her down at a marble table, and slid a diamond ring across the surface. "Marry me," he said. Hira's breath caught in her throat. "What?" Albert's gaze darkened. "Your family is drowning in debt. Your father's business will collapse in less than a month, and your mother's medical bills will go unpaid. Marry me, and I will fix everything. You will want for nothing." Hira stared at him, her heart thundering painfully. "And what do you get in return?" she whispered. Albert's lips curled. "You." Hira's eyes widened. "You want to own me." His gaze softened slightly as he leaned closer. "Number, I want to protect you." Tears burned in Hira's eyes. "And if I say no?" Albert's expression darkened. "That's not an option." Hira knew she had no choice. Her family needed saving, and this man, cold as he seemed, was offering her the only solution. With trembling fingers, she picked up the ring and slid it onto her finger. Albert's gaze darkened with triumph. "Good girl," he murmured, taking her hand and kissing it softly. "We'll be married tomorrow." Hira's heart pounded as Albert stood and pulled her close, his lips brushing against her ear. "You belong to me now," he whispered. And even though Hira's mind screamed that this was wrong, her heart betrayed her, skipping a beat as his arms tightened around her waist. That night, she lay awake in the massive bed of Albert's penthouse, staring at the diamond ring on her finger. She was going to marry the most ruthless man in the city. And somehow, she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The wedding was a breathtaking spectacle, the kind of grand event that only the wealthiest elite could afford. Lavish beyond imagination, but as cold and lifeless as the man Hyra Stewart was marrying. Hyra stood at the entrance of the marble aisle, her slender frame wrapped in an exquisite white gown that shimmered under the crystal chandeliers. The dress hugged her perfect curves, the delicate lace detailing trailing down to the floor like frost kissed by moonlight. Her wide brown eyes, framed by dark lashes, shone with a mixture of fear and resignation beneath the sheer veil that draped over her smooth, glowing skin. Her braided hair, styled intricately and adorned with tiny white pearls, cascaded down one side of her shoulder, making her look like a goddess stepping down from the heavens. But inside, Hyra's heart hammered painfully against her ribs as she stepped toward the man waiting for her at the altar. Albert Carrington stood at the end of the aisle, his towering frame wrapped in a sleek, black-tailored suit that emphasized his powerful build. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his chiseled jaw was dusted with a trimmed beard that only made him look more dangerously handsome. His piercing eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. There was no warmth in his gaze, only cold possession. He didn't smile as she approached, and yet his hand tightened slightly when she reached him. His strong fingers curled around hers as the minister began the ceremony. Hyra's head was spinning. Her lips felt numb as she whispered the vows, her voice trembling. Albert's low, controlled voice echoed through the cathedral as he recited his vows without hesitation, his eyes never leaving hers. When the minister declared them husband and wife, Albert's hand slid to the back of her neck, and he pulled her forward, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss that was far from gentle. His mouth was firm and commanding, a silent declaration that she belonged to him now. The crowd erupted into polite applause, but Hyra barely heard it over the roaring in her ears. After the ceremony, Albert led her to the grand reception hall where the elite mingled beneath glittering chandeliers. Hyra sat beside him at the long table, her slender fingers curling around the stem of a champagne glass as guests toasted to their union. Albert's hand rested possessively on her thigh beneath the table, his thumb stroking the smooth skin just below the hem of her dress. He didn't speak much, but when his gaze settled on her, it sent a shiver down her spine. After hours of forced conversation and polite smiles, Albert leaned toward her and whispered, "It's time to leave." His voice was low and dangerous, sending a spike of fear through her veins. He stood and extended his hand. Hyra hesitated for half a second before placing her hand in his. He guided her through the hall, his grip firm, as they passed through the double doors into the cool night. A sleek black limousine waited at the curb, and Albert helped her inside, sliding in beside her. The car ride was silent, the tension palpable. Hyra's heart raced as the limousine wound through the dark city streets toward Albert's penthouse. When they arrived, the driver opened the door, and Albert stepped out first, reaching down to help her out. His large hand wrapped around hers, and Hyra followed him into the towering glass building. The private elevator carried them to the top floor. When the doors opened, Hyra's breath hitched at the sight of the sprawling penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the glittering city skyline, the glass reflecting the soft glow of the recessed lighting. The interior was sleek and modern, dark marble floors, black leather furnishings, and minimalist artwork on the walls. It felt more like a museum than a home. Albert led her toward the bedroom, his grip never loosening. The bedroom was vast and intimidating. A massive bed with silk sheets sat in the center of the room, flanked by tall windows that framed the city lights. Hyra's pulse quickened as Albert turned to face her. His eyes darkened as he reached for the delicate veil covering her face. Slowly, he lifted it, his fingers brushing against her cheek as he pushed it back. Hyra's breath stilled as his intense gaze swept over her face, lingering on her parted lips. "Beautiful," he murmured, his voice low and rough. His fingers trailed down her jawline, sending a trail of heat through her body. "Do you understand what's about to happen?" he asked. Hyra's throat tightened. She could barely breathe as his hand slid to the back of her neck, drawing her closer. "You belong to me now," he whispered. His mouth descended on hers, capturing her lips in a deep kiss. His tongue swept into her mouth, claiming her, tasting her. Hyra's hands pressed weakly against his chest, but he didn't let her go. His hands slid down to her waist, pulling her flush against his hard body. Albert lifted her off her feet effortlessly, carrying her toward the bed. He set her down gently, his dark eyes never leaving hers as he slid his jacket off and unbuttoned his shirt. Hyra's chest rose and fell rapidly as he climbed onto the bed, his large frame caging her beneath him. His hands moved over her dress, finding the zipper at her back. Slowly, he pulled it down, exposing her smooth brown skin beneath the silk. Hyra shivered as his lips brushed against her shoulder. He stripped her with deliberate slowness, savoring every inch of her exposed skin. "So perfect," he murmured, his breath warm against her throat. Hyra's heart hammered as his mouth moved down the curve of her neck. When he finally took her that night, it wasn't rough. It was passionate and consuming. He claimed her with a fierce intensity that left her gasping beneath him, her nails digging into his shoulders as he moved above her. He whispered her name against her ear as he thrust into her, his dark eyes burning with possession and something else, something vulnerable. Hyra's cries filled the room as she surrendered to him, her body trembling beneath his relentless touch. Afterward, Albert lay beside her, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist. Hyra's chest still rose and fell rapidly, her body weak and trembling. But when she glanced at Albert, she saw something unexpected in his eyes. His gaze was softer, almost uncertain. He brushed a lock of hair away from her face, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "You're mine now," he said quietly. Hyra swallowed hard, but before she could respond, Albert leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to her temple. He pulled her closer, his strong arms enveloping her. That night, as Hyra drifted into sleep against his chest, Albert lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He had taken what he wanted, claimed her completely. But why did his chest feel tight? Why did her soft moans and the warmth of her body against his make him feel alive? He tightened his arm around her, burying his face in her hair. Something had changed that night. He had claimed her, but somehow she had started to claim him too. Albert woke up the next morning to the soft sound of Hyra's gentle breathing, his powerful arms wrapped tightly around her delicate frame as the early morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city skyline beyond the glass stretched endlessly, but Albert's eyes weren't on the world outside. They were on her. Hyra lay nestled against his chest, her soft brown skin glowing beneath the golden light. Her face was turned toward him, and for the first time in his life, Albert felt an unfamiliar warmth bloom in his chest as he studied her features. Her wide, beautiful eyes were closed, her long dark lashes brushing against her cheeks. Her perfectly arched eyebrows framed her face like artwork, and her full lips, still slightly swollen from his kisses the night before, were parted as she breathed softly. Her braids spilled over the white silk sheets in perfect contrast, and the smooth line of her neck disappeared beneath the thin sheet that barely covered her bare body. Albert's hand instinctively moved to her face, his fingertips brushing down her cheek, tracing the delicate curve of her jawline. He had claimed her last night with all the ruthless passion he was known for. But this morning, the intensity twisting through his chest wasn't just possession. It was something deeper, something dangerous. His thumb glided over her lips, and his breath caught when Hyra stirred. Her wide, innocent eyes fluttered open, and when those dark, endless pools met his gaze, Albert felt something inside him crack. He had never felt vulnerable before. He had spent years building walls around himself, letting nothing and no one touch him emotionally. But Hyra's gaze stripped him bare. She blinked sleepily, her delicate hand brushing against his bare chest. "Good morning," she whispered, her voice soft and still tinged with sleep. Albert's throat tightened. He leaned down and pressed a lingering kiss to her forehead. His hand slid into her braids, his fingers tightening around the silky strands as he whispered against her skin, "You're mine now." His voice was low and possessive, but beneath the roughness was a quiet desperation that he couldn't quite explain. Hyra's cheeks flushed, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she let her head rest against his chest, and Albert tightened his hold around her, his large hand splaying over the small of her back as though anchoring her to him. He didn't want to let her go. Ever. For a long time they lay there in silence, the sound of their synchronized breathing filling the vast bedroom. But eventually, Albert's phone buzzed from the nightstand. He ignored it. Nothing felt more important than the warmth of her body pressed against his. When it buzzed again, Hyra shifted, and Albert exhaled sharply before reluctantly reaching for it. It was a text from his assistant, a reminder of a high-stakes meeting scheduled for that morning. His jaw tightened. Albert was a man who never missed a meeting, a man who prioritized business above all else. But right now, the idea of leaving Hyra in bed, of stepping away from her, made his chest ache in a way that made no sense. He sighed and sat up, brushing a hand through his tousled dark hair. Hyra's gaze followed him, her brown eyes soft and questioning. "You have to leave?" she asked quietly. Albert's eyes darkened. "Yes," he said reluctantly. His hand brushed her cheek again before he stood, his broad back flexing as he walked toward the bathroom. When he emerged, he was already dressed in a tailored suit, his hair perfectly styled. But even as he adjusted his cufflinks and slipped his Rolex onto his wrist, his eyes kept drifting toward Hyra. She sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest, her braids falling over her shoulder as she watched him. Albert crossed the room in 2 long strides and leaned down, capturing her lips in a deep, lingering kiss. When he pulled back, his voice was rough. "Stay here. Don't leave." Hyra's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. Albert's gaze lingered on her for another long moment before he forced himself to leave. The drive to his office felt longer than usual. His mind refused to settle. Hyra's scent still lingered on his skin, a soft mix of jasmine and honey that clung to him like a ghost. He could still hear the breathless sound of her moans from the night before, could still feel the soft press of her nails digging into his shoulders as he claimed her beneath him. His body hardened at the memory, but what disturbed him more was the ache in his chest, the need to return to her. Albert was known for his ruthless efficiency in the boardroom. He ran his company with an iron fist, feared and respected by all. But that morning, he sat in his glass-walled office, staring out at the city skyline, unable to concentrate on a single word being said in the meeting. His mind kept drifting back to her, Hyra's wide eyes, her parted lips, the sound of his name falling from her mouth. His assistant, Mr. Crawford, eventually cleared his throat, drawing Albert's sharp gaze. "Sir, do you have any input?" Albert's jaw tightened. He rose from his chair, adjusting the cuffs of his jacket. "Meeting's over," he said curtly. "But sir," Crawford protested. Albert shot him a dark look. "I said it's over." He strode out of the room, his long legs carrying him toward the elevator. As soon as the doors closed, his hand curled into a fist against the polished steel wall. His heart was pounding. He couldn't stop thinking about her. He had intended to take her once to satisfy his curiosity, to claim her innocence and then move on. That had always been his pattern. Cold, detached, no emotional entanglement. But Hyra was different. Her softness, her beauty, her quiet vulnerability. It had unraveled him in a way that made him feel like he was losing control. He was supposed to own her, but somehow Hyra was starting to own him. When the elevator doors opened, Albert didn't head back to his office. Instead, he instructed his driver to take him home. The need to see her, to touch her, to know she was still his, it overrode every logical thought. When he stepped into the penthouse, Hyra was curled up on the couch, dressed in one of his white button-down shirts that hung off her slender frame. Her wide eyes brightened when she saw him, and Albert's heart slammed painfully against his ribs. He crossed the room in long strides and pulled her to her feet, his hands sliding into her braids as he kissed her with bruising intensity. "I couldn't stay away," he whispered against her lips. "I need you." His mouth moved over hers again, desperate and claiming. Hyra's hands slid up his chest, her soft moan vibrating against his mouth. Albert lifted her effortlessly, carrying her toward the bedroom. He wasn't sure what was happening to him, but one thing was certain. He was no longer in control. He was obsessed with her, and that terrified him more than anything else in the world. Albert had always been a man of control, a ruthless powerhouse who moved through life with cold precision, never allowing emotions to cloud his judgment. But Hyra was unraveling him piece by piece, and he was powerless to stop it. It started with small things. His need to see her first thing in the morning, the way his chest ached when she wasn't near him, the way her laughter seemed to echo through his mind long after she had left the room. He had taken her virginity that night, thinking it would be the end of whatever strange pull she had over him. But instead, it had marked the beginning of his quiet downfall. His obsession with her deepened by the day, turning into something dangerous, something he couldn't control. He started wanting more of her touch, more of her time, more of her heart. And for a man who had built his entire life on ruthless independence, that kind of vulnerability terrified him. But Hyra, without even trying, made him crave it. Albert began arranging outings, not because he needed to maintain appearances, but because he wanted to see her smile. Their first official date had been a private dinner at one of the most exclusive rooftop restaurants in the city. Albert had rented out the entire venue, ensuring that no one else would be present except for the staff. Hyra had walked in wearing a sleek black dress that hugged her curves perfectly, her long braids cascading down her back, and her smooth brown skin glowing under the candlelight. Albert had felt his breath catch at the sight of her, his jaw tightening with possessive need. He had stood from his chair and pulled it out for her, his large hand resting on the small of her back as he guided her to sit. Throughout the dinner, he couldn't take his eyes off her. Hyra had been nervous at first. She was not used to this kind of wealth, this kind of attention. But Albert's quiet intensity put her at ease. He had leaned toward her, his dark eyes never leaving her face, as he listened intently to everything she said. And then, when dessert arrived, Albert had reached across the table and taken her hand. His thumb stroked over the back of her hand as he said, "You have no idea what you do to me." Hyra's breath had hitched, her wide brown eyes softening. Albert had seen it then, that flicker of trust in her gaze, and it had nearly undone him. After dinner, he had taken her for a walk through the city streets. The cold air had made Hyra shiver, and without thinking, Albert had removed his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. When she had looked up at him with wide, grateful eyes, he had brushed her braids away from her face and kissed her right there on the sidewalk. It had been a soft kiss at first, but the moment her lips parted beneath his, a low growl had escaped his throat, and his hand had slid into her braids, pulling her closer as he deepened the kiss. After that night, Albert couldn't stay away from her. He began rearranging his schedule, canceling meetings and ignoring phone calls from business partners just so he could spend more time with her. He took her on his private yacht one evening, steering it himself while Hyra sat beside him, her bare legs tucked beneath her as the salty breeze played with her braids. Albert had wrapped an arm around her, pulling her into his chest as they watched the sunset together. "I don't know what you're doing to me," he had whispered into her hair. Hyra had smiled softly and whispered, "I think you're falling in love with me." Albert's chest had tightened painfully at her words because she was right. And for the first time in his life, the idea of love didn't scare him. It made him feel alive. Hyra had started to see beneath his ruthless exterior, and what she found there made her heart ache. Albert wasn't cruel by nature. He was guarded. He had built those walls because the world had taught him that vulnerability was a weakness. One night, they had been lying in bed together, Hyra curled against his chest, when he had started talking. Really, talking. He told her about his childhood, how his father had been a harsh man who valued money and power above all else. Albert had been raised to believe that emotions were a liability, that showing weakness would make him a target. His mother had been cold and distant, more focused on social status than raising her son. Albert had learned early on that love was a currency that could be bought and sold, and as a result, he had stopped believing in it altogether. But then Hyra had entered his life, and she had shattered every one of those beliefs. Hyra had listened quietly, her hand resting on his chest as he spoke. And when he had finished, she had leaned up and kissed him. Not a soft kiss, but a fierce one. Her lips had pressed against his with the kind of intensity that made Albert's heart pound painfully. "You're not your father," she had whispered against his mouth. "You're better than that." Albert had closed his eyes and pulled her tightly against him, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. He had kissed her deeply then, his hands tangling in her braids as he claimed her mouth with raw need. After that night, Albert's walls began to crumble even faster. He started bringing Hyra to his business events, holding her hand possessively as he introduced her to high-profile clients and business partners. The first time someone had dared to look at Hyra for too long, Albert had fixed them with such a cold, lethal stare that they had immediately backed off. One night at a gala, a wealthy investor had brushed his hand against Hyra's arm, and Albert had been on him in an instant, grabbing the man by the collar and shoving him against the wall. "Touch her again and I'll ruin you," Albert had growled, his eyes dark with rage. Hyra had stepped in then, her soft hands resting on Albert's chest as she whispered his name. Albert had turned toward her, his breathing ragged, and when he saw the softness in her eyes, the anger melted away. He had pulled her into his arms and kissed her right there in front of everyone, not caring about the audience. After that night, the whispers started, people talking about how Albert Carrington, the ruthless millionaire, had gone soft because of a woman. But Albert didn't care. He wore his love for Hyra like armor, unashamed and unafraid. He spoiled her endlessly, buying her dresses, diamonds, anything she wanted, but Hyra never asked for any of it. All she wanted was him, and Albert gave her everything. One night, as they lay tangled in bed after making love, Albert brushed his fingers down Hyra's cheek and whispered, "You changed me." Hyra smiled sleepily, her hand resting over his heart. "No," she whispered. "You were always like this. You just needed someone to see you." Albert's throat tightened. He kissed her then, pouring every ounce of emotion he felt into that kiss. He was falling hard, and for the first time in his life, Albert wasn't afraid of falling, because Hyra was right there beside him, holding his heart in her hands. Albert had always been possessive. It was in his nature to take what he wanted and protect it with ruthless determination. But when it came to Hyra, that possessiveness grew into something dark and uncontrollable, an obsession that consumed him. It started with the subtle things, his hand resting firmly on the small of her back at social events, his eyes scanning the room with deadly precision any time another man so much as glanced at her, his arm tightening around her waist whenever someone approached too closely. But that night at the gala, Albert's jealousy reached a dangerous peak. Hyra had walked into the event looking like a goddess. her figure wrapped in a sleek red gown that clung to her curves in all the right places. Her smooth brown skin glowed under the chandelier lights, and her braided hair was pulled back, accentuating the delicate line of her neck. Albert had nearly lost his breath when he saw her, his dark eyes burning with desire. He had crossed the room immediately, his hand finding her waist as he leaned down to whisper in her ear, "You look breathtaking." Hira had smiled shyly, her cheeks warming at his words, but Albert's expression turned to steel the moment a young businessman approached them. The man had that confident arrogance that Albert despised, the kind of man who thought he could charm his way into anything. "Mrs. Carrington," the man had said with a smile that was too friendly, his eyes lingering on Hira's figure, "you're by far the most beautiful woman in the room tonight." Hira's polite smile faltered as Albert's grip on her waist tightened. Her breath hitched when she felt Albert's muscles coil beneath his suit. "Thank you," Hira replied softly, but before she could say another word, Albert stepped in front of her, his broad shoulders blocking the man from view. His dark eyes narrowed dangerously as he said coldly, "Careful where you let your eyes wander." The businessman chuckled nervously, but Albert's expression was pure ice. And then, without warning, Albert turned toward Hira, cupped her face in his strong hands, and pressed his mouth to hers in a searing kiss. The room fell into stunned silence as Albert's lips moved against Hira's with fierce possession. His hand slid into her braids, tilting her head back as he deepened the kiss, his tongue sweeping into her mouth with dominating intensity. Hira's hands trembled as they gripped his jacket, her heart hammering in her chest. When Albert finally pulled back, his thumb brushed over her swollen lips as he turned toward the businessman and said in a low, lethal tone, "She's my wife. Don't forget it." The man stammered an apology and quickly disappeared into the crowd, but Albert wasn't finished. His hand remained on Hira's waist as he led her through the crowd, his jaw tight, his body radiating tension. He didn't speak until they were in the back of the limousine, the privacy glass separating them from the driver. Hira barely had time to catch her breath before Albert pulled her onto his lap, his large hands settling on her hips as his dark eyes burned into hers. "You're mine," he growled, his voice rough with need. "Do you understand that, Hira?" Hira's breath hitched. "Yes," she whispered. Albert's lips were on her neck a moment later, his mouth tracing the delicate line of her throat as his hands slid down to her thighs. "I don't want you talking to other men," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I don't want them looking at you. I don't want them thinking they even have a chance with you." Hira shivered as his hand slid higher beneath the fabric of her gown, his mouth hot against her skin. "Albert," she breathed. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his dark gaze intense. "You belong to me," he whispered. "Only me." Hira's heart fluttered wildly at the possessiveness in his tone, the raw hunger in his eyes. He pulled her even closer, his forehead resting against hers as he whispered, "I'll ruin anyone who tries to take you from me." When they arrived at the mansion, Albert didn't even wait for the driver to open the door. He carried Hira into the house, his strong arms wrapping around her as he ascended the stairs two at a time. He pushed open the door to their bedroom and pinned her against the wall, his mouth claiming hers with bruising intensity. Hira moaned as his hands tangled in her braids, pulling her head back as his lips trailed down her neck. "Do you know what you've done to me?" he whispered harshly. "You've made me weak, Hira, and I hate it." But the way his hands slid down her body told a different story. He craved her, needed her. She was his weakness, but he didn't care anymore. His mouth found hers again, his tongue sweeping into her mouth as he pressed her harder against the wall. Hira gasped when he lifted her effortlessly, her legs wrapping around his waist as his mouth moved to her shoulder. "You're mine," he growled. "Say it." "I'm yours," Hira whispered breathlessly. "Forever." Albert's chest rumbled with satisfaction at her words. He carried her to the bed and laid her down with reverent care. His dark eyes burned with intensity as he hovered over her, brushing his knuckles down her cheek. "If anyone so much as looks at you again, I'll destroy them," he said darkly. "No one touches what belongs to me." Hyra's heart raced at the dangerous edge in his voice, but beneath that possessiveness was something deeper, something fragile. Love. Albert had built his life on control, but Hyra had slipped through the cracks and settled into his heart. He had never loved anyone before, but with Hyra it was different. It was all-consuming, obsessive, and he didn't know how to survive without her anymore. Hyra reached up and touched his face, her thumb brushing over his bottom lip. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. Albert's eyes darkened, his hand tightening around her wrist as he pressed a kiss to her palm. "You'd better not," he said, "because I'd tear the world apart to get you back." He kissed her again, softer this time, his hand sliding beneath her dress as he deepened the kiss. His need for her was endless, bottomless, a hunger that could never be fully satisfied. And Hyra, despite her initial fear of him, was falling just as hard. She wrapped her arms around his neck and let him pull her under, drowning in the fierce passion and devotion of the man who had once been feared by the entire business world. Albert Carrington had been ruthless, cold, and untouchable. But now he was a man consumed by love, and for the first time in his life he didn't want to fight it. He only wanted more of her. Always. Albert Carrington had been a man defined by ruthless ambition, cold precision, and an impenetrable emotional wall. For years, he had dominated the business world with a brutal efficiency that left competitors trembling and allies wary. His decisions were calculated, his demeanor ice-cold, and his heart unreachable. But that all began to shift the moment Hyra Stewart stepped into his life. It wasn't immediate. At first, Albert fought it, telling himself that his growing attachment to her was nothing more than physical desire, a reaction to her breathtaking beauty and intoxicating innocence. But night after night, as Hyra lay sleeping in his arms, her breathing soft and steady, Albert found himself watching her in the dim light of their bedroom, his heart aching in a way that both frightened and soothed him. He had never known tenderness before, but Hyra had given it to him freely. With every smile, every soft touch, and every look of quiet trust in her wide, beautiful eyes. Slowly, Albert began to change. His mornings, once filled with cold, impersonal business calls and rigid schedules, now began with the soft warmth of Hyra curled against his chest. He would wake up before her sometimes just to watch her sleep. He would trace his fingers along the soft curves of her face, push a stray braid behind her ear, and press a gentle kiss to her forehead before getting out of bed. One morning, Hyra stirred awake to find Albert standing in the kitchen, wearing a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his hair tousled from sleep. He was holding a spatula in one hand, flipping pancakes with surprising ease. "You're cooking?" she asked sleepily, rubbing her eyes. Albert turned, a rare smile softening his sharp features. "I wanted to surprise you," he said. "Sit down." Hyra sat at the marble counter, watching as he plated the pancakes and added fresh strawberries on top. He set the plate in front of her, leaned down, and kissed her temple. "Eat," he murmured. Hyra took a bite, her eyes widening. "This is really good." Albert smirked, sitting down next to her. "I've been practicing." Hyra smiled, her heart warming. The Albert Carrington she had married, the ruthless, cold businessman, was becoming someone else, someone warmer, someone human. That transformation didn't stop at home. At the office, Albert began treating his employees differently. He listened more, his once sharp and impatient tone softening when someone made a mistake. He started offering paid leave to workers dealing with family issues and increased salaries for those who had been underpaid for years. Rumors of his sudden change spread quickly, whispers of how the once feared Albert Carrington had smiled at his secretary, had helped a junior employee fix a broken presentation, had even shown up at an employee's father's funeral to offer support. "Mr. Carrington seems different," his assistant whispered to a colleague one afternoon. "It's because of his wife," the colleague replied knowingly. "She's changing him." The biggest shift happened when Albert began investing in charities. For years, Albert had viewed charity work as nothing more than good PR, a necessary obligation rather than a moral responsibility. But after Hira had gently suggested they attend a fundraising gala for an orphanage, Albert had seen the genuine gratitude in the children's eyes when he donated a staggering amount to rebuild the facility. That night, when they returned home, Albert sat in the living room with Hira curled in his lap, her head resting on his chest. He ran his fingers through her braids, his hand gentle and reverent. "I never cared about any of that before," he admitted softly. "But seeing those kids today, knowing I could actually help them, it made me realize how empty my life was before you." Hira lifted her head, her dark eyes searching his face. "You're not empty anymore," she whispered. Albert's hand slid to her cheek, his thumb brushing over her soft skin. "Because of you," he said hoarsely. "You make me human, Hira. You saved me." Hira smiled, pressing her hand over his heart. "You saved yourself," she whispered. Albert shook his head. "No," he said. "I was drowning and you pulled me out." From that day on, Albert began dedicating large amounts of his wealth to causes Hira cared about. He funded scholarships for underprivileged children, opened women's shelters, and donated millions to hospitals. The press began calling him the new Albert Carrington. But Albert didn't care about the headlines. He only cared about the way Hira's face would light up when he told her about a new project or a life he had helped change. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Albert came home to find Hira sitting by the window, looking out at the city skyline. He walked over and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured. Hira leaned into his warmth. "How different you've become." Albert kissed the side of her neck. "Different, but better?" "So much better," Hira whispered. Albert turned her around to face him, his dark eyes filled with a softness that had once been impossible for him to show. "I didn't think I could ever feel this way," he said, "but you make me want to be better. For you, only for you." Hira's eyes filled with tears as Albert cupped her face, his thumb brushing away a stray tear. "I don't know how to live without you anymore," he admitted. "And I don't want to know." Hira smiled through her tears. "You'll never have to." Albert kissed her deeply, his arms wrapping tightly around her waist as he lifted her off the floor and carried her toward the bedroom. That night, as Hira lay beneath him, her breathless moans filling the darkened room, Albert knew there was no turning back. He had spent years building walls around his heart, convinced that love was weakness. But now Hira was his weakness, and he didn't care. Loving her had made him stronger, softer, more human, and he would spend the rest of his life proving to her that she was the reason he had been saved. As they lay tangled together beneath the sheets, Albert kissed her forehead and whispered, "You're the only thing that matters." Hira smiled sleepily and whispered back, "You always mattered. You just didn't know it yet." Albert smiled softly, holding her closer. He had once ruled his world with power and control, but now his world revolved around Hira, and for the first time in his life, he was truly happy. Albert sat on the edge of their massive bed that night, his elbows resting on his knees, his head bowed low as the dim glow of the city lights filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Hyra sat beside him, sensing the heaviness in his silence, the quiet tremor in his usually steady breath. She reached for his hand, her slender fingers curling around his strong ones. He didn't pull away, but his grip was tense, his knuckles whitening as he struggled to find the words buried deep within the darkest corners of his heart. For weeks, she had sensed that something haunted him, a shadow lurking beneath the tenderness he now showed her, a wound that had never fully healed. Hyra knew Albert was a man who had built his entire life around control and power, but in the quiet moments, when he would hold her just a little too tightly or kiss her with a desperation that bordered on fear, she knew he was protecting himself from more than just the world. "Albert," Hyra whispered, her voice soft and steady. "What's wrong?" He lifted his head slowly, his dark eyes glinting with an unfamiliar sheen of moisture. His jaw tightened, and for a moment Hyra thought he would pull away, but instead he laced their fingers together and drew in a shaky breath. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low and strained. Hyra's heart thudded painfully in her chest, but she nodded, her eyes searching his face. "You can tell me anything." Albert swallowed hard, his gaze falling to the floor as if he couldn't bear to meet her eyes. "You've asked me before why I wanted to marry a virgin," he began, his tone heavy with quiet anguish. "I avoided the question because I didn't know how to explain it. I thought, if you knew the truth, you would look at me differently." Hyra shook her head, her hand tightening in his. "Albert, nothing could make me see you differently. Just tell me." He sighed, his broad shoulders sagging beneath the weight of his memories. "My father." His voice broke slightly, and Hyra's heart squeezed painfully at the raw emotion in his tone. "My father was a powerful man, wealthy, influential, but he was also cruel. He married my mother out of convenience, not love. But she loved him. God, she loved him so much. She gave him everything. She built a home for him, raised his children, stood by him through every storm." His hands trembled slightly as he spoke, his eyes darkening with bitterness. "And he repaid her by cheating. Over and over again, he would come home smelling like other women, his tie loosened, his hair tousled. And my mother would sit at the dinner table, tears in her eyes. But she never left him. She told me that love was about sacrifice, about staying even when it hurts." Albert's mouth twisted into a bitter smile, but it destroyed her. She became hollow, quiet. She stopped smiling, stopped laughing. She used to sing when I was a boy. I can still hear her voice sometimes in my head. But after the affair started, she stopped singing altogether. Hyra's eyes filled with tears as Albert's pain wrapped around her heart like a cold hand. "I watched my mother become a ghost of herself because she loved a man who didn't deserve it. And I told myself I would never let that happen to me. I would never give a woman that kind of power over me. I decided that love was a weakness, a trap that would strip me of control and make me vulnerable." His gaze finally lifted to hers, dark and stormy. "That's why I wanted to marry a virgin. I thought, if you were untouched, if you had no past, no other men in your heart, then maybe you wouldn't betray me. Maybe you wouldn't leave me broken the way my father left my mother." A tear slipped down Hyra's cheek, and she reached up, cupping his face between her hands. "Albert," she whispered, her thumbs brushing over his rough stubble, "I'm not your father, and you're not your mother." His eyes glistened with unshed tears as he stared at her, his chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. "I know," he whispered, "because you've shown me that love doesn't have to be weakness. You've shown me that it can be strength." Hyra leaned in, her lips brushing over his. "I will never betray you," she promised. "Never. You don't have to be afraid anymore." Albert's hand slid into her hair, his fingers threading through her braids as he kissed her with a depth of emotion that made her entire body tremble. It wasn't the usual possessive kiss she had grown used to. It was tender, raw, and heartbreakingly vulnerable. When he pulled away, his forehead pressed against hers, he whispered, "I don't know how to let go of this fear." "Then let me hold it with you," Hyra whispered. "Let me carry it until it fades." A single tear slid down Albert's cheek, and Hyra kissed it away, her lips brushing over the salty trail on his skin. He pulled her into his lap, his arms wrapping around her waist as he buried his face in her neck. "I don't deserve you," he murmured. "You deserve everything," Hyra replied fiercely, "and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." Albert pulled back, his dark eyes shining. "I love you," he said, the words trembling on his lips. Hyra's heart soared, and she smiled as tears rolled down her cheeks. "I love you too." That night, Albert made love to her slowly, his hands tracing every inch of her body with reverence and care. His kisses were unhurried, his touch gentle, as if he were memorizing her, cherishing her. And when they lay tangled together beneath the sheets, Albert held her close, his heart beating steadily against her back. "You've changed me," he whispered. "You've given me something I didn't think I'd ever have." Hyra smiled sleepily. "What's that?" "Peace," he whispered. "And love." Albert drifted off to sleep that night with Hyra in his arms, no longer haunted by the ghosts of his past. He had thought love would destroy him, but Hyra had saved him. And as he held her close, feeling the soft rhythm of her breathing against his chest, Albert knew that he would spend the rest of his life protecting the woman who had healed him. Hyra had always been beautiful, but now she was glowing with a quiet confidence that radiated from within, and Albert couldn't stop himself from watching her with an intensity that bordered on obsession. It started with small changes. Hyra began sketching more often, her notebook always tucked under her arm, her slender fingers constantly moving across the pages, bringing her designs to life. Albert would sit on the edge of their massive bed late at night, his tie loosened, a glass of whiskey in his hand, watching her as she sat cross-legged on the floor, her brow furrowed in concentration. He would smile as she chewed on the end of her pencil, a cute habit she had since childhood, and he knew better than to disturb her when she was in her creative zone. "What are you working on?" he asked one evening, setting his glass down on the side table and sliding down next to her. Hyra glanced at him, her wide brown eyes sparkling with excitement. "Just some ideas for dresses. I've been thinking about starting a line." She hesitated, her confidence wavering for a moment. "But it's probably silly." Albert's brows lifted, and he cupped her chin, tilting her face toward him. "It's not silly," he said, his voice low and serious. "It's brilliant." Hyra smiled shyly, but Albert could see the fire beginning to flicker in her eyes. "You really think so?" "I know so," Albert replied, "and I'm going to make sure the whole world knows it too." The next morning, Albert called his team together and made it clear that he wanted to launch a new fashion line under Hyra's name. His team had never seen him so determined, so focused. He reviewed every design, approved every marketing detail, and insisted that Hyra have full creative control. "This is her vision," he told them. "Make it perfect." At first, Hyra was overwhelmed. The pressure of stepping into the spotlight felt immense, but Albert was there for her every step of the way. He would take her hand during meetings, sit beside her as she reviewed fabrics, and when she felt uncertain, he would whisper in her ear, "Trust yourself. You've got this." Hyra poured her heart into the designs, blending elegant cuts with bold colors and rich textures. She wanted her line to reflect strength and femininity, and Albert was mesmerized by the way her mind worked. He would watch her from across the room, completely captivated as she directed models, adjusted seams, and explained her vision to the design team. The night of the launch arrived, and the venue was breathtaking. a massive hall adorned with crystal chandeliers, velvet-draped walls, and golden accents. Celebrities, socialites, and industry titans filled the room, but Hyra stood at the center of it all, wearing one of her own designs, a sleek, off-shoulder crimson gown that hugged her curves perfectly. Albert stood beside her, dressed in a custom black suit, his hand resting protectively on her waist. "You're breathtaking," he whispered against her ear, his lips brushing her skin. Hyra smiled, but her heart hammered in her chest as the lights dimmed and the runway show began. The models strutted down the runway in her designs, flowing gowns, tailored suits, and delicate evening dresses. The audience was silent, and Hyra held her breath, clutching Albert's hand. When the last model took her final step, the crowd erupted in applause. Hyra's mouth parted in disbelief as people rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Tears burned her eyes as Albert turned her toward him, his dark eyes filled with pride. "You did it," he said softly. "They love you." "I can't believe it," Hyra whispered. Albert cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. "Believe it, my queen." Suddenly, reporters swarmed them, cameras flashing. "Mr. Carrington, your wife is the star of the night. How do you feel about Hyra's success?" someone shouted. Albert pulled Hyra close, pressing a firm kiss to her temple. "I feel like the luckiest man alive," he said. "My wife isn't just beautiful. She's brilliant. And the world knows it now." Hyra flushed, but the strength in Albert's voice made her heart swell. After the event, they attended an after-party hosted by one of the top designers in the world. Hyra was surrounded by influential figures, and instead of feeling intimidated, she stood tall, speaking confidently about her designs and her creative vision. Albert stood nearby, watching her with dark, possessive eyes. His wife had transformed before his eyes, from a shy girl to a commanding woman, and he found himself even more drawn to her. A man approached Hyra, a well-known Italian designer known for his flirtatious nature, and Albert's jaw clenched as he watched him lean too close. The man smiled, complimenting Hyra's designs and her beauty, his hand lingering too long on her arm. Albert was across the room in seconds, his hand wrapping around Hyra's waist as he pulled her back against his chest. "She's married," Albert said coldly, his eyes narrowing dangerously. The designer raised his hands in surrender. "Relax, Carrington. I was just talking." "Talk from a distance," Albert growled, his hand tightening on Hyra's waist. After the man left, Hyra turned and touched Albert's face. "Albert, you can't scare everyone away." "Yes, I can," Albert said darkly. "Because you're mine." Hyra smiled, brushing a kiss against his lips. "And I'm not going anywhere." That night, Albert made love to her slowly and deeply, whispering her name against her skin as they lay tangled beneath the sheets. When they woke the next morning, Hyra turned to find Albert watching her, his dark eyes soft. "What?" she asked sleepily. Albert traced her bottom lip with his thumb. "I'm so proud of you," he said. "You didn't just make a name for yourself. You became the woman you were always meant to be." Hyra smiled, her eyes glistening with happiness. "I couldn't have done it without you." "You could have," Albert said, "but I'm glad you let me stand beside you." He kissed her, slow and deep, his hand sliding into her braids. "You've made me a better man, Hyra, and now the world knows how incredible you are." Hyra wrapped her arms around his neck, her lips brushing against his ear. "And you're mine forever," she whispered. "Forever," Albert echoed, pulling her beneath him. And as the morning light filled the room, Albert realized that Hyra hadn't just become strong. She had made him stronger too, and he would spend the rest of his life making sure she knew just how much he loved her. Albert had never known fear like this, not even in the cutthroat business world where deals worth billions hung in the balance, where betrayal and loss were the norm. But none of that compared to the sheer terror that gripped him when he saw Hera lying unconscious in the back of the ambulance. Her beautiful brown skin looking too pale, her delicate frame unnaturally still. His heart hammered so violently in his chest that it hurt, and his hands trembled as he brushed his fingers through her braids. "Stay with me, Hera. Please, baby, don't leave me." His voice cracked as the paramedics rushed her through the emergency room doors, and when they told him to stay outside, Albert nearly tore the doors off their hinges. "I'm not leaving her," he growled, his eyes wild with desperation. "Sir, you need to give us room to work," one of the nurses said, trying to calm him down. But Albert couldn't think clearly. His heart was thundering, his breathing shallow. He had never felt this helpless, this stripped of control. The woman he loved more than his own life was lying on a hospital bed, and he couldn't do anything to save her. Finally, when they allowed him into the room, Albert nearly collapsed at the sight of her fragile body hooked up to machines. An IV line was taped to her arm, and a heart monitor beeped softly beside her. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, his hands shaking as he brushed his thumb over her knuckles. "Hera, baby, I need you to open your eyes," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He leaned closer, pressing his forehead to her hand, his dark hair falling over his eyes. His throat burned, and for the first time in years, Albert felt tears sting his eyes. "You can't leave me, Hera," he whispered hoarsely. "Do you hear me? You're my life. I can't breathe without you." His chest tightened painfully, and he brought her hand to his lips, pressing soft, desperate kisses to her fingers. His mind raced with horrible thoughts. What if she didn't wake up? What if he lost her? The very idea made him nauseous. He had never allowed himself to depend on anyone before, had always kept his heart guarded behind steel walls. But Hera had slipped past his defenses with her soft smiles, her gentle touch, her unwavering love. Now the idea of life without her was unbearable. Time lost meaning as he sat by her side. Nurses came and went, but Albert didn't move. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. He just sat there, holding her hand, whispering prayers he hadn't spoken since childhood. "I'll give up everything, Hera. Just open your eyes. I'll tear down my empire if it means you'll come back to me. Just come back to me." His head dropped onto the mattress beside her hand, his body trembling from exhaustion. He had never begged for anything in his life, not from business partners, not from investors, not from anyone. But for Hera, he would beg on his knees, his hands tightened around hers. "You promised me forever," he whispered brokenly. "You can't break that promise. I need you." Hours passed, then a full day. Albert's jaw was rough with stubble, his suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Doctors told him to rest, but Albert refused to leave. He stayed by Hera's side, stroking her hair, brushing his lips over her forehead. "Come back to me, baby," he whispered again and again. "Please." And then, just as he was about to lose hope, he felt her fingers twitch in his hand. His head shot up, his breath hitching. "Hera?" Her eyelids fluttered weakly, and then her beautiful brown eyes slowly opened. She blinked up at him, confusion flickering across her delicate face. "Albert?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was the sweetest sound Albert had ever heard. A choke sound left his throat, and before he could stop himself, tears slipped down his cheeks. He cupped her face with trembling hands and leaned over her, brushing his lips over her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. "Hera, oh my God, baby." He kissed her hands, her knuckles, his entire body trembling with relief. "You scared me," he breathed, his voice breaking. "You scared me so damn much." Hera's gaze softened as her fingers weakly brushed against his cheek. "I'm sorry." "No," Albert said fiercely, pressing his forehead against hers. "Don't apologize, just don't ever scare me like that again." His hand slid into her braids, cradling her head tenderly. "I thought I was going to lose you." Hyra's lips curved into a faint smile, and her eyes softened with affection. "I'm not going anywhere, Albert." He exhaled shakily, his lips brushing over hers in a tender, lingering kiss. "I can't live without you," he whispered. "You're my everything, Hyra." Her eyes filled with tears, and she reached up to trace his jawline with her delicate fingers. "I'm not leaving you," she promised. "I love you too much." Albert's heart swelled painfully in his chest. He kissed her forehead, her nose, her cheeks. "I love you too," he whispered. "So damn much." A nurse walked in quietly, smiling when she saw that Hyra was awake. "She's going to be fine," the nurse said gently. But Albert wasn't listening. He couldn't stop looking at Hyra, couldn't stop brushing his fingers over her skin, as if he was trying to memorize every inch of her. "I'm taking you home," he said softly, "as soon as they release you, and I'm never letting you out of my sight again." Hyra smiled weakly. "You're overreacting." "No," Albert said firmly, brushing his thumb over her bottom lip. "You scared me too much, baby. I'm never letting you out of my arms again." He leaned closer, his lips brushing over her ear. "You're mine, Hyra. Forever." A single tear slid down Hyra's cheek, and Albert kissed it away. "Forever," she whispered. Albert's chest tightened with overwhelming emotion. He kissed her again, deeply and tenderly, his hand resting over her heart. He could feel the steady thrum of her heartbeat beneath his palm, and for the first time in 2 days, Albert finally exhaled. She was alive. She was his. And he would spend the rest of his life making sure she knew how much he loved her. Albert had spent months planning this night, and now that it was finally happening, his heart pounded wildly in his chest. The private beach was illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns scattered along the sand, their golden light flickering against the backdrop of the setting sun. The sky above was a masterpiece of pink, lavender, and deep crimson, and the sound of the waves crashing softly against the shore created a rhythm that matched the thundering of his heartbeat. Hyra stood at the edge of the beach, her bare feet sinking into the soft, cool sand, her flowing white dress fluttering gently in the ocean breeze. She looked breathtaking, like a goddess bathed in twilight. Her long braids cascaded down her back, and the sunset painted her brown skin in shades of gold and rose. Albert stood a few steps away, dressed in a simple yet elegant white linen shirt and pants, his dark hair tousled slightly by the wind. His eyes softened as he watched her, his heart swelling with so much love it nearly brought him to his knees right there. Hyra turned to face him, her eyes widening when she saw the nervous yet determined expression on his face. He slowly walked toward her, the sand shifting beneath his feet, and when he reached her, he took her hands in his. His thumbs traced over the delicate bones of her knuckles as he gazed down at her with dark, intense eyes. "Hyra," he murmured, his voice low and steady, though his heart was racing wildly. "You've already given me the greatest gift of my life by becoming my wife. But now, I want to ask you to choose me again, not because you have to, but because you love me." Hyra's breath hitched, her heart fluttering wildly in her chest. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Albert smiled faintly, dropping down on one knee before her, his hands still holding hers. The breeze played with the edges of his shirt, and the setting sun turned his features into sharp, golden perfection. He pulled a small black velvet box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a stunning diamond ring, bigger and more exquisite than the one he had placed on her finger at their first wedding. "Hyra, I didn't know what love truly was until you walked into my life," he said softly, his eyes gleaming with emotion. "You've changed me. You made me a better man. I don't need you to stay with me because of a contract or a vow made under pressure. I want you to stay with me because you choose me. Every day. Forever." Hyra's vision blurred with tears as Albert's words sank into her heart. Her lips trembled as she whispered his name, but he continued, his dark eyes locking with hers. "Marry me again, Hyra," he whispered. "Not because I need you, but because I love you, because I can't breathe without you, because you're the only person who's ever made me feel alive." A tear slipped down Hyra's cheek as her chest tightened painfully with love and disbelief. Her hands trembled as she stared down at Albert, who was looking at her with such raw vulnerability that it made her knees weak. She had never seen him like this, so open, so stripped of the cool, controlled facade he usually wore. He was giving her his heart, offering her everything. And she wanted it all. "Yes," Hyra whispered, her voice shaky with emotion. Albert's breath shuddered and his eyes darkened with relief and unrestrained love. He slipped the ring onto her finger, the diamond catching the fading sunlight and sparkling brilliantly. And then Albert surged to his feet, pulling her into his arms and capturing her lips in a deep, passionate kiss. Hyra melted against him, her arms winding around his neck as he lifted her off the ground and spun her in the air. Her soft laughter mixed with the sound of the crashing waves. When he set her down, Albert framed her face between his hands, his forehead resting against hers. "You're mine," he whispered, his breath fanning over her lips. "Forever." Hyra smiled through her tears, her hands clutching his shirt tightly. "Forever," she whispered back. Albert's lips brushed over hers again, softer this time, but the intensity beneath the kiss made her heart pound. He slid his hands down her back, lifting her into his arms effortlessly. Without breaking the kiss, he carried her toward a private canopy nestled further up the beach. It was draped in white silk, with rose petals scattered across the floor and flickering candles casting a golden glow around the intimate space. He set her down gently on the soft bed of pillows and rose petals, his dark eyes never leaving hers. "I need you," Albert whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. He leaned over her, his hand sliding along her jaw as his lips trailed down the side of her neck. Hyra's breath hitched, her hands tangling in his hair as he pressed his body over hers. "You're so beautiful," he whispered. "You have no idea how much I love you." Hyra's hands slid down his back, her heart racing as he began undressing her with delicate, reverent touches. The night air was warm against her skin as he laid her down beneath him. His lips traced over her collarbone, her shoulders, the swell of her breasts. "You're everything to me," he murmured, his breath shaky as he kissed down the length of her body. Hyra gasped softly, her fingers digging into his shoulders as he made her feel worshipped, adored. "Albert," she whispered, her voice trembling. He lifted his head, his dark eyes blazing with passion and love. "Say you're mine," he demanded softly. "Always," Hyra breathed. "I'm yours. Always." Albert's lips captured hers again in a desperate, consuming kiss. Their bodies moved together beneath the stars, the sound of the waves crashing in the distance, blending with the quiet gasps and moans escaping Hyra's lips. Albert kissed her with a hunger that left her breathless, but beneath that hunger was tenderness, a softness that told Hyra exactly how much she meant to him. When it was over, Albert pulled her close, his hand resting over her heart as they lay beneath the canopy, their bodies tangled together beneath the soft blankets. He kissed her forehead, his dark eyes gleaming in the dim candlelight. "I love you," he whispered. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that to you." Hyra smiled sleepily, her fingers tracing over his jaw. "You already have," she whispered. Albert tightened his arms around her, his lips brushing over her temple. "Sleep, my love," he whispered. "I'm never letting you go." As Hyra drifted off to sleep in his arms, Albert held her close, his heart pounding with gratitude and love. He had never believed in fate before Hyra, but now he knew. She was his destiny, his queen, his everything, and he would spend the rest of his life making her feel like the most cherished woman in the world. Albert's world shifted the moment Hyra placed his hand over her stomach and whispered, "We're going to have a baby." Time stood still as the words sank in, his breath hitching in his chest, his heart slamming violently against his ribcage. His dark eyes widened in disbelief as he stared at her beautiful face, her brown skin glowing, her wide eyes shimmering with nervous excitement and tenderness. "Hyra," he breathed, his hand trembling slightly as he pressed his palm more firmly against her belly. A warm wave of emotion rushed through him, a feeling so intense it nearly knocked the breath out of his lungs. He suddenly lifted her into his arms, his hands trembling with joy as he spun her around, laughing breathlessly even as tears gathered in his dark eyes. Hyra's soft laughter blended with his, her arms wrapping around his neck as he held her close. "We're going to have a family," Albert whispered, his voice rough and thick with emotion as he pressed his forehead against hers. Hyra smiled through her tears, her hands cradling his face. "Yes, we are." Albert's chest tightened painfully as a fresh wave of love surged through him. He lowered her to the ground slowly, his hands framing her face as he kissed her deeply, his lips lingering over hers as though trying to convey every ounce of love he felt at that moment. His thumb brushed away a tear that slid down her cheek, and his hand drifted down to her stomach, his fingers splaying protectively over the small swell that hadn't even formed yet, but already meant more to him than anything in the world. Over the following days and weeks, Albert became more protective and attentive than ever before. He wouldn't let Hyra lift a finger. He insisted on carrying her bags, making her meals, and driving her wherever she needed to go. If she so much as sighed, he was at her side instantly, his dark eyes scanning her face with quiet intensity. He started working from home more often, setting up a luxurious lounge area for her in his office with plush pillows and cashmere blankets so she could rest while he handled business calls. Whenever she napped, he would sit beside her, his hand resting on her stomach, his heart swelling with warmth at the thought of the tiny life growing inside her. At night, Albert would hold her close, his large hands splayed protectively over her belly. He would kiss her forehead, her cheeks, and then her stomach, his lips lingering as he whispered, "You're already so loved, little one." Hyra's heart would melt every time he spoke to their baby, his voice low and soft, filled with so much tenderness it made her chest ache. "You're going to have the best daddy in the world," Hyra whispered one night, as Albert's hand stroked slow, gentle circles over her belly. Albert's dark eyes softened as he lifted his head, brushing his lips over hers. "And the most beautiful, loving mommy," he murmured. His hand slipped beneath her silk nightgown, his palm resting warmly over her growing belly. "I'm going to spoil both of you for the rest of my life," he promised, his voice hoarse with emotion. Hyra smiled sleepily as his hand traveled up to cup her cheek. "I don't need spoiling," she whispered. "Just you." Albert's heart squeezed painfully as he kissed her again, lingering over her lips before pressing his forehead to hers. "You'll have me," he said quietly. "Always." As the months passed, Albert's obsession with Hyra grew deeper. He accompanied her to every doctor's appointment, his hand clasped firmly around hers as they listened to the steady sound of their baby's heartbeat for the first time. Albert's throat tightened with emotion, his dark eyes shining as he brought Hyra's hand to his lips, pressing a reverent kiss to her fingers. "That's our baby," he whispered, his voice breaking slightly. Hyra's heart swelled as she nodded, her other hand resting protectively over her stomach. Albert spent hours reading parenting books and researching the best prenatal care. He hired the best doctors, nutritionists, and even a massage therapist to keep Hyra comfortable during her pregnancy. He would wake up early to make her breakfast, fussing over the presentation and ingredients, even though Hyra insisted she didn't need anything fancy. "You and the baby deserve the best," Albert would reply every time, his dark eyes gleaming with quiet intensity. Hyra would smile as he brought her breakfast to bed, watching as he knelt beside her, pressing a kiss to her belly before handing her a carefully arranged plate of fruit and yogurt. "Eat, baby girl," he'd say with a smirk. "You're eating for two now." Hyra would laugh softly, her hand drifting to his hair as he laid his head on her lap, his dark eyes watching her with quiet adoration as she ate. One evening, Albert came home to find Hyra curled up on the couch, her hand resting on her belly as she napped. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, his heart squeezing painfully at the sight of her. She looked so peaceful, so beautiful, her braids splayed over the cushion, her soft lips slightly parted. He walked toward her quietly, lowering himself onto the floor beside the couch. His hand drifted to her belly, his heart fluttering when he felt a soft movement beneath his palm. "Hey, little one," he whispered, brushing his lips over Hyra's belly. "I can't wait to meet you." Hyra stirred, her eyes fluttering open as a soft smile curved her lips. "They're going to have your eyes," Albert whispered. "And your smile." Hyra's hand drifted into his hair as she smiled. "Or they might have your brooding stare," she teased. Albert chuckled softly as he leaned up and kissed her. "Either way, they'll be perfect." As Hyra's belly grew, Albert became even more protective. He would wrap his arm around her waist when they were in public, his dark eyes watching anyone who got too close, with a quiet warning in his gaze. At home, he would massage her feet after long days, his large hands kneading gently as Hyra melted beneath his touch. One night, Hyra woke up to find Albert already awake, his hand resting on her belly, his dark eyes shimmering in the moonlight. "I can't stop thinking about them," he whispered. "What if I'm not a good father?" Hyra's heart softened as she reached out and cupped his cheek. "You already are," she whispered. Albert's eyes darkened as he leaned down and kissed her deeply, his hand pressing more firmly over her belly. "I'll protect both of you with my life," he whispered hoarsely. "I promise." As Hyra drifted back to sleep, Albert stayed awake, his hand never leaving her stomach. His heart thudded painfully in his chest as he whispered, "I love you, little one. You're going to have the best life. I'll make sure of it." His hand tightened protectively over Hyra's belly as his dark eyes softened with quiet devotion. "I'll never let anything happen to you," he vowed. "You're my everything." The moment Hyra's soft cries filled the delivery room, Albert's world stopped. His heart slammed painfully in his chest as the doctor carefully placed their newborn son into his arms. His large hands trembled as he looked down at the tiny bundle swaddled in a soft white blanket. A shock of dark hair peeked out from beneath the blanket, and when the baby's wide brown eyes blinked open, Albert's breath hitched violently. His son had Hyra's eyes, those warm, deep brown eyes that had pierced through every layer of ice he'd built around his heart. "Oh my God," Albert whispered, his throat tight with overwhelming emotion. His chest tightened painfully as the baby's tiny fingers curled around his finger. Tears welled up in his dark eyes as he carefully cradled the baby against his chest. "He's perfect," Albert breathed, his voice shaking. His dark eyes lifted to Hyra, who lay exhausted but radiant in the hospital bed, her beautiful face glistening with sweat and tears. Her eyes met his, and despite the exhaustion, she smiled softly. Albert walked toward her carefully, his heart hammering as he lowered himself beside her. His hand shook as he brushed her braids away from her face, his thumb tenderly stroking her cheek. "Hyra." His voice broke as tears slid down his cheeks. "You've given me everything I didn't know I needed." His hand slipped beneath her head as he leaned down and pressed a soft, reverent kiss to her forehead. Hyra's eyes shimmered with tears as her hand drifted up to cover his over the baby. "I love you," she whispered. Albert's heart clenched painfully as he gazed at her, his hand trembling as he brushed his fingers through her braids. "I love you more," he whispered hoarsely. Albert had always been a man who believed he was too cold, too damaged to experience something as pure and beautiful as this. But Hira had shown him that love wasn't weakness, that vulnerability wasn't a flaw. Albert pressed his lips to their baby's soft head, inhaling the sweet, delicate scent. "Our son," he whispered. His chest swelled with so much emotion he thought it might burst. "We made him." Hira smiled through her tears, her hand resting over Albert's as he cradled their child. Albert stayed by her side for hours, refusing to let go of his son. His dark eyes softened as he studied every perfect detail, the tiny fingers, the soft dark curls, the delicate eyelashes resting against chubby cheeks. "He's going to have your smile," Albert murmured to Hira, his lips brushing over her temple. "And your strength?" Hira smiled sleepily as Albert carefully passed the baby to her. Her heart fluttered as the baby's eyes fluttered open again, his little mouth forming a perfect pout. "Or maybe he'll have your serious expression," Hira teased. Albert chuckled softly, his dark eyes gleaming as he sat down beside her, his arm wrapping around her shoulders protectively. "He's already perfect," Albert whispered. His eyes darkened as he leaned in, brushing his lips over Hira's cheek. "Just like you." Over the next few weeks, Albert became a completely different man. He retired from Ruthless business ventures, stepping down from his CEO position without hesitation. The board was shocked. Albert had built his empire with cold calculation and strategic brilliance, but none of it mattered anymore. His family was his empire now. He dedicated himself fully to Hira and their son. Mornings started with Albert waking before Hira, slipping out of bed to feed the baby. Hira would wake to find Albert in the nursery, shirtless and sleepy-eyed, holding their son against his chest as he whispered softly to him. "It's okay, little man," Albert would murmur, pacing slowly. "Daddy's got you." Hira's heart would melt as she leaned against the door frame, watching the way Albert's large hands cradled their son so gently. Sometimes Albert would lift his gaze and catch her watching. His dark eyes would soften as he smiled. "Come here, baby girl," he would say, holding out his free hand. Hira would step into his arms, resting her head against his chest as their baby nestled between them. "I didn't know I could love this much," Albert would whisper into her hair. "You saved me, Hira, and now you've given me everything." Their home became filled with warmth and laughter. Albert would carry their son through the house, talking to him in a low, soothing voice. He would spend hours on the floor with the baby, letting him crawl over him and tug on his hair. "Strong grip," Albert would say with a proud smile. "He's going to be a fighter." Hira would sit nearby, her heart full as she watched the two of them together. At night, Albert would bathe their son, his large hands impossibly gentle as he carefully washed the baby's soft curls. Afterward, he would sit in the rocking chair, holding their son against his bare chest, humming softly. Hira would watch from the doorway, her heart swelling with love. "He loves you so much already," she whispered one night as Albert kissed the baby's forehead. "I love him more," Albert whispered. His eyes darkened as he turned toward Hira, setting the baby carefully in his crib before walking toward her. His hands cupped her face as his dark eyes searched hers. "But not as much as I love you." Hira's breath hitched as Albert's lips descended on hers, kissing her deeply and tenderly. "Hira," he whispered against her lips, his forehead resting against hers. "You gave me a family. You made me whole." Hira's heart thudded painfully as Albert's hands drifted to her waist, pulling her closer. "You saved me," he repeated hoarsely, "and I will love you until my last breath." Hira smiled through her tears as she wrapped her arms around his neck, kissing him back. "I love you too." Albert's eyes softened as his hand drifted down to her back, pulling her close until there was no space between them. Their son stirred softly in the crib, and Albert's gaze shifted toward him. "He's our future," Albert whispered, "and I'm never letting either of you go." Hyra smiled as Albert's arms tightened around her, her heart swelling with love and contentment. They had built something perfect together, something stronger than wealth or power. Love, family, forever.